welcome to the last session of our Conversations on Race program. It's been a very interesting program so far. But before we go into that, let me just say, my name's Lynn Randall. I'm the president of Chesapeake Forum, and with the help of Oxford Community Center and Liza Ledford, we have been able to put this program together for you. Now, I really appreciate everyone's patience as we've gone through this, because this is our first attempt at hybrid learning. And as you can imagine, there's something different that happens every time we turn this system on. But Liza has weathered that, and we have been very appreciative of that. For those of you who don't know anything about Chesapeake Forum, this is an academy for lifelong learning. And it was our pleasure when Dodie Thune came to me and talked about doing this program to incorporate this into our semester, because we feel it's very, very important to have discussions like this. I want to especially thank Dr. Maggie Anderson, who led our first discussion and gave us a framework of terminology to use. And then how could we not go away from Connie Hope's discussion that we had to cut short, because everybody got involved in that discussion and we wanted more, which is a good indication of what we should be thinking about for the future. But today I have with us special guests on a panel discussion that brings this discussion home to Talbot County and some of the issues that we face here in Talbot County. I have Captain Anthony Smith from the St. Michael's Police Department. I have Nancy Andrew, who's the executive director of the Talbot Family Network. And I have Deborah Short, who is the program manager of BAM there in Easton. But I'd like to ask each of them to start off by giving us a short description of how their organization has gotten involved in making Talbot County a better, more inclusive place to live. Tony, why don't you start?
Absolutely. So I'm Chief Anthony Smith, St. Michael's Police Department. No problem calling me captain. It's all good. It's okay. It's okay.
I'll call you the boss.
The boss. No problem. So anyway, so I like to start off again by thanking you guys for putting this forum on, Chesapeake Forum. I'd like to thank Nancy Andrews. I'd like to thank Deborah. I'd like to thank all my partners, that aren't here or maybe listening, Kelly Griffith, Linda Webb, Social Services, because these folks, which you see here at the table, are on the front lines of dealing with these racial discussions, these discussions about race and how we can make society better. So I want to first of all thank you, because it makes my job much easier when you guys are out there doing it, because let's face it, what we've heard from Margaret and Connie was great, excellent stuff. More academic. I'm going to try to talk to you about the practicalities of it, the real issues, because we're on the front lines as police, having to deal with it. Just look at George Floyd, okay? So, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I'd like to thank you all for putting this on. One of the things in our groups in St. Michael's and elsewhere that we have conversations on race, we try to establish a tone for anybody listening, because we want more people to get involved. We try not to make people villains, okay? That's a rule that we try to set. So understand that when we're talking about this issue, we're just trying to have a communication about how to solve problems, because we're not trying to make people villains, because we can get caught up in that and people can get scared. I know this because people come to me and say that I'm not a racist. Nobody's saying you are racist. So we got to try to tone it down to make sure we're not making anybody villains. So that's the challenge that I have going out in the community and dealing with these type of issues. So as Chief of Police, St. Michael's Police Department, I've been there since 2007, and have been the chief since 2012. Started my law enforcement career back in 1982 with the Maryland State Police. I rose to the rank of lieutenant, one of the best jobs I ever had, second to St. Michael's Police Chief. Learned a lot in my career at the State Police. I have a bachelor's degree in accounting, and I told these young ladies here how I ended up getting in police work, but I won't go into that because we don't have that kind of time. But anyway, I ended up during my career, and while I was in my career at state police, I ended up going to school and got a master's degree in public policy at University of Maryland School of Public Affairs. So that's my background in police work. What we try to do and what I try to espouse at the St. Michael's Police Department with some relative success is with the community, is community policing. It has to be 99% of what a police department does. So simply being because we only got one set of handcuffs. And it's just not enough room to arrest everybody that we encounter. So with that, we have to do community policing. We have to figure out ways to solve problems, okay? Somebody comes into the police station, for example, we have something set up called a safe station. If you come in, you're on drugs, we don't necessarily put handcuffs on you. We say, hey, we're gonna get you help through the health department, okay? Had a lady come in about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm just giving an example of success stories of how we have to operate the business model that I try to portray at the St. Michael's Police Department. Young lady comes in, 6:30 in the morning, chief, I'm getting ready to get evicted, my 2 kids and my husband. My husband's on opioids. I need $900. I said, ma'am, I can't reach into my pocket and give you $900, but I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to find an organization that will help you. Luckily that morning, 8 o'clock that morning, I had a meeting at Rotary. When I left Rotary, I had $1,000 in my pocket. And I bring this up to you because this is an African-American family. And the whole goal of doing this is getting folks to come to you with their problems. You might not be able to solve them all, but what does it do? It builds trust. And if we're gonna get past the racial issue, especially with law enforcement, because let's face it, we have that issue in law enforcement, we have to build trust in the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, about statistics and all that.
Nancy?
Yeah, thank you. So again, Nancy Andrew, as mentioned, I'm currently the executive director of Talbot Family Network. Who is that? Most people in the community don't know who we are, and that's fine. We're the local management board for Talbot County. We're kind of a behind the scenes, and I'd much rather you know about all the frontline workers like FAM and other agencies in our community that are really providing direct service. We administer a pool of funds for the county that we invest in community programs. Essentially, we're like a mini children's cabinet at the local level. So serving on my board of directors are representatives from all of the primary child and family serving agencies in the county, the health department, the school system, social services. And then the impact of our board is amplified because we have a variety of community members like Chief Smith serving on our board who can help us identify needs in the county. Every county in Maryland has a local management board. They were set up in the late 1990s because some Maryland officials recognized that when certain social issues were addressed, issues involving children and family, that often how funds were dispersed was determined by the largest counties, by Baltimore City, by Prince George's County, the more urban areas. And so our local management boards puts power in our local community to address local needs. One way we are doing that beyond some after school programs and family home visitation programs that we invest in is we have been doing race equity work and investing in race equity work in our community for about 7 years. So we have an ongoing program called Conversations on Race. We took over a program that Talbot Association of Clergy and Laity had been doing through Sunday suppers, and they were ready to make a handoff. We were able to pick up that program and continue it. We also offer a variety of training to our community, both to professionals, retired community members, just interested community members. And then there's ways we look at data to really amplify the disparities that we see in our community about how people in our community are experiencing life, and we can talk more about that. I also just want to springboard off a couple of things that the chief said. One of the things we try to look at in our conversations on race is calling people in, not calling them out. There's a real call out culture right now, especially in a social media driven world, and calling people out does not create an opportunity for dialogue. These are hard conversations. And so we need to develop the skills to have these conversations. Most of us aren't raised to talk about race. So that's why an event like this is so important. And thank you for hosting it. Chief really talked about a lot of the frontline, or what I might call micro ways that race is showing up in our community. I've gone back to school right now. Most of my life I've spent in the nonprofit sector, but I decided to go back to school to get my master's in social work because I'm really concerned about the systems issues. So even if we could take away individual acts of racism in our community, My concern is that racism will still exist because it's baked into our system. So we have to change the way systems operate. And that's part of what local management boards seek to do by how we fund programs, how we look at data, and that's an ongoing process for us. So I'm grateful to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Nancy, for saying a lot of things that I'd like to say. My name is Deborah Short, and I am the Program Director at BAM. A lot of people tell me they haven't heard of BAM before. What is BAM? Well, BAM's an acronym that stands for Building African American Minds. And we have been established for like 17 years now. We came about as a result of Dina and Derek Daly in our community who wanted to give back to kids that were graduating from high school and wanting to go on to further their education in college, especially African-American kids. Well, Easton and St. Michael's, we found out that there were hardly any, pursuing a higher education. So we wondered, we got a think tank together and wondered, well, what's going on? Why aren't our kids wanting to attain higher education? So the think tank came up with the idea that we need to have an after-school program. And that after-school program should not just start at any place. We need to go back to the beginning, which is first grade, and follow the kids all the way through and try to help them in the areas that they're weak in, but also to expose them to different things, to take them on field trips, to take them to museums, to give them what they're not getting at home, to give them meals and what have you. And so that's how we started. And we, like I said, have been together about 17 years now. We've seen about 200 African-American boys go through our program. We meet at the Easton Elementary School. We have separate into first through, now we're up to middle school, high school grades, so that we can, we have tutors in each of those areas so that we can really focus on what they need to know. We even have a summer program that we have had for the past 10 years or so, where we take them on field trips, where we meet together and make sure they are continuing with their academics, that they read through the summer, that they, whatever they need. We also work with the families. We try to have the families to come in. We try to incorporate things with the family. We have a parent partnership party that we have every year with the family, just so that they will know what to expect and what we do. So our, I guess, point is to really, our goal is to really take our kids, to the next level, to let them see that they can be all that they want to be, regardless of how they start out, and that the focus has to be on academics at this point. They just can't think, because a lot of our boys think that they'll get into sports, they'll get into basketball or football, and they'll achieve through that way. But we have to impress upon them the importance of academics. And I think that's what BAM does. A lot of our kids have had, some behavior problems because of, and I think if we go back to the schools, I want to talk about, is because of the trust issue. A lot of us do not trust people that don't look like us, because for so long we've been, I think, taken advantage of or not looked at as people, but as property that stemmed from, and I hate to say this, but slavery. It stemmed from slavery. And so it's information like this that we need to know, that you need to establish a relationship with kids in order for them to feel comfortable, in order for them to feel like they can succeed. And that's our goal. That's what we do at BAM. When they see the teachers there, and we don't just have all African-American kids, we open it up to anybody who wants to come. We have had white boys come, we've had Hispanic boys come, but we also want them to see African-American adults who really care about them. Going back to, I was born and raised here, going back to the community thing. If you, and I was raised in a community in Unionville with, nothing but Black people, segregated. But we had community pride. we had, our parents taught us how important staying together and helping one another. And we had strong teachers, and we had businesses. We thrived more, I think, during that time of desegregation than what happened when we actually had racial segregation. Because we had in the community, in that culture, people who understood us, people who were willing to know, how we thought or how we felt. So I think it's so important, and Derek will agree with this. He thought that, we need to, first of all, come together as a race. When we first started and at BAM, they thought we were being racist because it was just inclusive of African Americans. But in order to be able to have relationships with others, we have to kind of almost pull back and find out who we are, and be strengthened within ourselves. And that way, we're not ashamed or not afraid to be who we want to be to other cultures, to other races. And hopefully other races will want to understand us, because believe it or not, we are different. People say we're what do we want to say? We're more alike than we're different. In some respects, we do have some differences in what we come from and what we've been exposed to and what's going on, in our little communities, in our cultures. So I think one of the priorities in coming together in groups like this is to really know how important relationships are, and to establish relationships, to get to know one another. I'm passionate about that. I can't feel what you feel until I know, what you're experiencing and where you've been. So that's my kind of spiel on it. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad about anything. No, just want you to hear our heart.
Well, thank you very much for that. I can tell that I don't have any shy people up here. So as we continue with the discussion, I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is a discussion and you are a part of the discussion. But we need to be able to all hear individuals as they speak. So if you would just raise your hand and get my attention, then I'll indicate to you that I see you, and then as soon as someone takes a breath, then I'll point to you. And Dodie, did you have a comment?
Do I have to come up there? Yes, when Connie spoke the last session, she talked about the language of racism, and one of the expressions that she used was race equity.
Mm-hmm.
And Nancy, you mentioned that, and I'd like you to perhaps explain more to the group what that means.
Especially internally, because we're a bunch of white people talking about it. We want to hear what you think about that.
Oh, I thought you said Nancy.
Yeah, but if you have thoughts, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at you.
I think Connie used that image that's, for those of you who saw that program, I think is a very good way to explain the difference between equality and equity. The people standing on the boxes. So first, everybody's standing on the same box because that is equal, but it's not an equitable experience for everybody because everybody's not starting from the same place. So to assume that one box is going to make everybody have the same outcome or experience is just not fair. We host some workshops with Talbot Family Network with a group called the Race Equity Institute. We will bring them to the community again to have the chance to do them. They are fantastic trainers. And I won't do this total justice, but they have an analogy about some research that was done using Monopoly to explain race equity. So if you have a game of Monopoly going, but half the people playing have to watch the game be played for an hour while everybody else plays. And then after an hour, they can enter into the Monopoly game Well, all the properties are already bought. All the money's already been distributed. But hey, you've got an equal opportunity to participate, so get in there. So equity is about making sure that we recognize race, we disaggregate data so we're aware of the disparities, we really know what's happening in our community in terms of outcome. And then creating strategies that engage people or offer people services in an equitable way. Having those different size boxes, or maybe a box isn't even what someone else needs. They need some other assistance so they could see over the fence in that picture Connie used.
So would you say it's similar to just giving someone a leg up?
I'm a little uncomfortable with that language because that almost assumes that the person needing the leg up did something wrong.
Or that they know they need a leg up. Can you talk about that issue a little bit, the equity?
And I don't want to talk about that right now.
Okay.
Nancy just said it all. I mean, it's pretty much straightforward what she said. One of the things that we try to do, when I say it as a group, this is, and I'm probably leading into your next question, is how can we fix things, or how can we create things so there's more equity? And one of the things that's great about the Talbot Family Network, being on the board, is because we do things like dealing with children of incarcerated parents. I mean, that's huge, because, and I hate getting into statistics, but it is what it is. 70% of the population in the prison system in Maryland is African American. So we need to change that. And how we change that, we got to come together and do equitable things like what we're talking about. That's the nuts and bolts of it. We got to figure out how to get straight to that problem by problem solving, and not always making the answer being someone being incarcerated. Because look at what you triggered once you arrest that person. What we deal with at the Talbot Family Network. Now, I'm not naive. There's bad people out there and they have to be arrested. We know that. But it's not always the case. So we got to figure out ways, and for me, speaking from a law enforcement equity aspect, to get past that equity part, those are the types of things that we have to do. Look at ways alternatively that we can do our job to come to an equitable solution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was going to say, things will never be equal. They'll never be equal. We can strive for them to be equitable. But as Nancy already pointed out, we started at a level that was never equal, of course, we know that. But we can do things to try to achieve things to be equitable, okay? I was just thinking about our society as a whole and how we've been just separated, since the beginning, of course. We do things different ways, okay? Because our society has been ingrained, of course, with racism. So what we do is we have to go back to the political system, the education system, economics. We have to start by having representation, I think, in all of those areas. Because when you have representation in those areas, then you have what? A voice in those areas. And until we can do that, then I think we will still be represented by people who don't know what our expectations are, what we're going through.
Nancy, you mentioned earlier about the data that you look at. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the problem looks like here in Talbot County?
Sure. And let's just say I'm a government and politics and an English minor. So remembering statistics isn't my bailiwick, but to speak generally, and the data is available on the Talbot Family Network website. So accessible to everyone, and also happy to make it available to be shared as a follow-up plan.
Good.
But some of the disparities we see in outcomes, and unfortunately, these disparities have been exaggerated by COVID, or the pandemic has really shined a light on these. So For instance, in children receiving free and reduced meals or qualifying for free and reduced meals, we see that disproportionately impacting students of color in Talbot County Public Schools. Receive for kindergarten readiness and testing scores outcomes in reading and in math, particularly as kids continue in the system, we see those disparities increase. Chief has mentioned about disparities in incarceration, which are reflected here at the local level, not just at the state level, and the ripple effect that has generationally on families, children, grandchildren, and how that really trauma gets passed on. And I think that's an important word to bring into this conversation. For those of you that aren't familiar with adverse childhood experiences, a concept really supported by the Center for Disease Control, really recognizing that difficult and traumatic experiences that children experience during their formative years, especially when their brains are developing, really can have a chronic and lifelong effect on outcomes, on well-being, chronic health issues, lung disease, heart disease, decrease the lifespan, and also the likelihood that people engage in high-risk behaviors. So imagine if your challenge is that you've been exposed to traumatic experiences, including racism during your childhood, then you live in a neighborhood that's under-resourced and doesn't have access to healthcare, to good schools, to libraries. So you see how all of those disparities get magnified and intensified.
Struck me about growing up here in Talbot County that there was a culture of helping one another. Have you seen that disappear? And Chief, I'm wondering if you've seen that. Is that still intact here in St. Michael's? Is it intact there? And why do you suppose that's? How have we gotten to where we are today?
I think that because of, I don't want to blame it on desegregation, so to speak, but because we have kind of come out of our community environments, our areas where we were comfortable and we could rely on one another and help one another. Now we're in little pods. We're kind of, in places, some of us can afford to be in one area, live in one area, whereas others are still, within their segregated communities within a community, but still having to kind of fend for themselves. Now we don't have the help of each other, the encouragement of one another. We are kind of depending on the government.
Does the church, do your churches help?
Oh, definitely. Now churches are one area that I see that we really flock to or focus on in order to receive. A lot of times we don't get therapy if there's, we need counseling or something. Church might be an area that we go to make us feel better, to deal with the pressures and the stresses of everyday life. So that would be one area. But as far as the community, I don't see it. We're trying to bring that back now, I think. I think a lot of the things that have taken place in the world and the nation has opened up our eyes to the fact that we need to come together more, that we need to support our communities if nobody else does.
Chief, you have some thoughts about that?
So we had a conversation, Deborah and I, on the way in. I grew up in a little area called Beltsville, and everybody was related. My grandmother on my father's side lived next door. My grandparents on my mother's side lived in the field back through, and then your cousins and your aunts and your uncles, and it was like a village. And everybody raised each other in an atmosphere like a village. In St. Michael's, that's what drew me to St. Michael's a lot, because I saw this in my growing up. It was similar capacity. We talked about parents, children of incarcerated parents. One of the things that results from that is you have great grandparents raising kids now
Oh, yeah.
of incarcerated parents. So just to say that village doesn't exist, it still does to a certain degree. Thank God it does, because I witness it and try to support it in St. Michael's. I can name 5 families that are like that. So those are the things, like I said, that's the nuts and bolts of what we have to overcome in dealing with this issue that we're talking about today, because it's affecting the African-American community a lot. So those are the things that we try to work on. So moving forward, those types of things that we have to deal with and we have to make better. We have to keep doing the things that we do at the Talbot Family Network, at the St. Michael's Community Center. I sit on the board at St. Michael's Community Center and the Talbot Family Network. And we get, like Nancy said, we get funds from the government targeting those types of families and things like that. So we can keep that community vibrant and going, that aspect of it.
One thing that comes to my mind listening to the two of you is the issue of jobs. So you raise young men to want
band is educating and sending off to college. If I'm a student of color that graduates with a 4-year degree or maybe goes to law school or gets my master's, even if there are jobs here, do I feel like I'm going to come back to this community and get the same shot at being hired? Depending on what my name is on the resume, how I show up, will I have the same shot? If I am hired, what will my experience look like with that employer in terms of being promoted? So I think there's an issue at a couple levels.
And those are larger political types of issues in terms of bringing redevelopment corporate, bringing those jobs here that are sustaining, not just summer jobs. Did you have a comment back here?
Yeah, I'm honestly somewhat confused. Okay. Deborah, and I don't know, I'm sure you're not saying this, but it sounds like you're for segregation.
No.
Because you keep on mentioning how there was a community when everybody was together. Okay. Well, people and now it doesn't sound like there's as much. And people who have been able to do better in any community, okay, regardless of whether it's Black or whatever, and then decide to move to a better life, I don't see anything wrong with that. What I understand is that the people who are still left, they still have that community. Okay, and it is up to them to make sure that community, keeps on thriving. But when I hear you talking, you're using the words segregation and desegregation, and it frankly just confuses me.
That's a good,
it really
that's
does.
a good question. So let's
And
see
I
if we,
understand what you're saying, but what I'm trying to get you to understand is that the foundation needs to be set, needs to be, I think, strengthened in order for these kids to really understand who they are before they're pushed into, okay, for example, when I came up in Unionville, here on the Eastern Shore, and I went to Easton, it wasn't Easton, it was Easton Junior High at the time. And I came from a strong sense of family. I went there before my friends had to go there. There was the year that, they gave you a choice. If you wanted to go to an all-white school, or if you wanted to wait and go when they, desegregated and had to go. So I decided, my mother and I, my brother, one of my older brothers decided that we would go the year before. Now, I came from a strong sense of family, is what I'm talking about, the foundation. And so when I went to Easton Junior High School, I was put into a situation where I felt very uncomfortable, even though I thought I had a strong sense of who I was. I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't feel like I had enough education to keep up with my white counterparts. I just felt like, I was just entrenched with a lot of issues, culture I wasn't familiar with. So I just thought that if I knew, people already, that if I had the experiences that maybe some of them had, then maybe I would feel more comfortable with being in that situation. So I'm not talking about being segregated all the time. I'm saying BAM was built as a result because we thought these kids needed to be together and strengthened with one another before they could go into another environment where they would feel, successful, or they would feel more comfortable. I'm not saying
that makes sense. What you're saying now makes sense to me. It's the words that you were using before, which just didn't, because it sounded like, things were better when we were segregated. I'm like, wait a minute here. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, to us, they kind of were. If we understood it, if you see, and that's one thing you have to look at my perspective. And I think that's where the conversation gets glitched and gets mixed up, because a lot of times you're looking from the outside saying, how could things be?
oh, you are so right about that. It's so hard.
But I'll challenge you on that, because, so from my community, okay, whatever my community is, there are people in that community who are going to grow up, who are going to be lucky enough, hopefully, to go to college, hopefully enough to get a good job, and in my mind, do better than their parents are. And in doing that, they may leave the community. Okay, doesn't matter whether it's a community of color, it's a community of that's.
But we did the same thing, and we did more of that when we had that strong sense of community.
So why don't you still have
the foundation back then?
So why don't
that's
you still?
What we're trying to come to now. That's what we're talking about. That's why we're having this conversation, because we're not like that now. We're not segregating now. We're all inclusive. We're in an integrated society. So now we have to make sure that you understand us like the community that we came from understood us.
Okay, I'm gonna say it differently. We have to understand each other. It's
Oh,
not
we
just,
do,
not just
yeah.
understanding your community, it's understanding everybody's community. That's my point. And I guess my question to you.
But we always have to understand your community. We've always had to. That hasn't been the issue.
That's right.
You know, I'm not even going there. Okay, so my point is that, so how did that disappear? Because people left and did better? How did that sense of community go away that you're talking about? Did it because people did better and left, or what caused it to go away?
So can I have a few examples? So, just, I think of the Hill neighborhood here in Easton, which, from what I have understood about the studies that have been done of that, and actually I've heard Condoleezza Rice talk about this experience for her family, what it was like for her family during segregation and the impact of desegregation. So during segregation, I'm not a historian, this is my layperson understanding. There were Black-owned banks. So if I was a person of color and I wanted to buy a house or start a business, I could go to a Black-owned bank and get a loan. With desegregation, many of those Black-owned banks didn't make it, or they don't have comparable assets today to our mainstream white, so to speak, mainstream banks. So suddenly then, as a person of color, I couldn't get the financing to buy a home, to start a business. Redlining comes in, and I am specifically kept out of certain neighborhoods. And because of redlining, and I start to lose the opportunity as a person of color to build wealth in my family and pass it on generationally to my children.
Or to create a credit.
Right, so that starts to break up neighborhoods. Then as a country, we underinvest in certain neighborhoods, so we see areas of extreme poverty where people are really kept in those neighborhoods because it's hard to transition out of those. So those are just my understanding of the few things that the kind of systems things that change, that broke apart families and really undermine the integrity of communities and neighborhoods.
So taking it,
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, so taking it a step further, here's a dirty word nobody likes hearing, gentrification. I know for a fact in St. Michael's, I talked to old folks that live in St. Michael's, old African-American folks. The town at one point in time was 90% African-American. This is the very point of what we're talking about. Now, you can't hardly go in town and buy a piece of property in St. Michael's without it costing $1 million. What happened?
Let alone lunch.
What happened? So those are the types of things that has changed over time that has broken down the community. And African Americans have lost out. So what do we do to correct that? Nancy just said something, and I was jotting down some notes while she was talking, creating wealth, home ownership. Okay, how do we get to a point where we're having and supporting African Americans in creating wealth through home ownership? I mean, Reverend Wallace, if he's listened to this session, forgive me for bringing you up, but I was listening to a sermon one day that he was preaching in church, and not all people are asleep, Reverend Wallace, when they go to church. Some people actually listen, and he was preaching about how an African American go in a car dealership and buy $100,000 car, and the person was telling the sign on the dollar, just take the car. If you don't like it, bring it back. Try buying a home. It takes 6 months to buy a home. We have to change that. That's part of this systematic thing that we're talking about. We can't even begin to talk about racial equity until we change things like that. I've just become a part of the Vaccine Equity Task Force, okay, where we went into underserved communities and tried to change the way the healthcare that African Americans are receiving. Okay, so those are the types of things. What other note did I make? Family structure. Family structure. Okay, this is going to be controversial, what I'm about to talk about. Is anybody in here familiar with the book, A Team of Rivals?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a wonderful book written by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Well, I guess I'm saying her name right. I haven't read the book in 10 years, but I distinctly remember reading certain passages in that book. And I think Deborah talked about it a little bit, about what slavery did to the African American in this country. Okay. There's a passage in the book that I think Edwin Bates which Abraham Lincoln put together a team of rivals that always agreed with him politically. But he wanted them on his team because they brought different aspects. So in this particular passage, Edwin Bates talks about, and I think I got his name right, he talks about what slavery did to the African-American family. And he says, because we've torn the family up, we've told African-Americans that you breed, you separate the family, you send the mother off to the north, you send the father off to the south. Will be 200 years for African Americans can get equal in this society. We're only 159 years away from slavery. Now, this was a man saying that 159 years ago, okay? Acknowledging the effects of slavery. So this is why we're still dealing with it. Abraham Lincoln, as great as a president as he was, remember, we all know this from history. This is why critical race theory is important, because all it is talking about history. We have to know our history. What did Abraham Lincoln think at one point in time? That African Americans, once they got freed from slavery, would have to be sent back to Africa because we could never assimilate. Now, just think of that thinking and how it's prevalent today and how we're still struggling with the issue. Great president, one of the greatest of all time. Love Abraham Lincoln for what he did, because the most important thing he had was courage, okay, which a leader must have. He had a courage to face that slavery issue. So he's a great president. But still, what those two folks brought up 159 years ago, we're dealing with today. They knew it was going to be a struggle, bringing communities together like we're doing now. So the best thing that we can do is do what we're doing now. Keep talking about it. It's very important. And as Dr. Martin Luther King spouses, as long as we keep the lines of communications open, there's hope. We're moving in the right direction. We're moving in the right direction. And one more history lesson, because the only reason why I bring this up, because it's amazing what you read in history, how it's prevalent today. The founding fathers, right, the Declaration of Independence. You said it, I think, talking about segregation, racial aspects being political. They knew when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, you can read it in some of George Washington's references in his writing. They knew slavery was wrong. They knew it was wrong, but they didn't get rid of it. Why? Because it was a political issue. They didn't go to the moral issue. And
Yes.
of course,
Yep.
but more political issue. They knew they couldn't get the declaration and get the states to ratify the Constitution. So I only bring all this history up because we're still dealing with it today. And these folks, Abraham Lincoln and Edwin Bates, they knew we were going to be dealing with it for years to come because of what slavery did to this country.
Now you had a question.
Yeah, I was brought up in a very white homogeneous area. Okay, Long Island, New York, and then upstate New York. I moved down here in 2013. And what I noticed, the first Christmas I was in St. Michael's was 4 churches coming together singing. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. So my question, I guess, goes back a little to the churches and what you had said, and I had a similar reaction as this gentleman.
By the way, I'm from Long Island also, so I know what you're talking about.
Is it that you do not want your churches diluted from that community? I attended New St. John's a few times, and I was welcomed with open arms. But I'm wondering if you would feel a loss of community if these churches were more integrated, because in St. Michael's, there's 3 white churches and 1 black church, and then there's New St. John's. And then my next point I wanted, and which you started to address, Chief Smith, is how do we do this on a more local level, one-on-one? How do I get to be friends with you? And go out to lunch with you, or have you join my book club? How do we move beyond the political and do it on a more personal level? Because then we will know each other and understand each other.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I am not against integration. I don't think that was clear. I was just talking about the foundation of the family and how our kids needed to just be brought up in a, well, no, at least they're not going to be desegregated in schools. Of course, they're going to be together with others, but to have a place where they can go to know that they can be themselves, or they can be built up. And then, you know, go back, be around, yes, everybody, I'm not saying that, I don't want us to be two separate, you know, separate races again, where we just are apart. But I think we just need to be strengthened within our own race first, before we can bring value to anybody else. We need to know who we are. For so long, I think we haven't known who we are. That's why I want my daughter, who goes to Easton High right now in 11th grade, to go to an HBCU, a historically Black college. I went to Bowie. I really came to know who I was even more when I was around other people that looked like me. Not to say that I'm uncomfortable around you, no. I value your friendship. I had lots of white friends at Easton High. Believe it or not, at that time in 1972, when I graduated, I was the class president. Because I think popularity. They like me
Because
so
you're so
much.
shy.
Yeah.
They like me so much. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the work that we have to do. You know, you have your own work to do as well. But the work that we have to do is getting to know who we are. So that when we come to the playing field, you know, we'll be equipped.
Just another thing, one of the things that I've taken some of Nancy's trainings, and one of the things that made the most impact on me in one of those trainings was an African-American woman saying, we are exhausted. And when you white people want to ask us to engage in these kind of racial conversations, we may not have the energy for it.
Right.
And I thought, wow,
That's
that,
true.
yeah. So, and I don't think that most white people know this, okay? So maybe that could
That it
be,
gets tiresome.
Yeah.
Now, somebody had a question in the back here.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me is that there's all the issues we talked about here. There's also the basic economic issues that are difficult for people that are struggling to get past it. And one of the things I can think of is I grew up in Boston and spent most of my life there. And I went to a public school that was an exam school. You had to take an exam to get in, all that stuff. When I graduated, there was one Black kid, it was all boys, one Black boy in my class out of 200. Today, it's probably 25, 30% of various minorities in that same school. So in a place like Boston, it has actually got better over the years because of the economy being so strong and people could work up through the education system. Whereas I think here, as much as I love living here, it is economically limited, and I think it makes it more difficult.
The whole jobs idea. We don't bring big corporations here that have multifaceted needs.
Again, I guess I don't know Boston, I've lived in Talbot County most of my life, but I still wonder for those young men who are now able to attend that school, once they graduate, can they still go out and buy a home in any neighborhood that they want to? Can they, so while we're seeing progress on certain fronts, I just.
Well, in the example I gave you, when I graduated from that school and today, everybody in the graduating class goes to a four-year college, or 99%. And the real estate now is wide open if you have the money. The trick is to have the money because real estate in a good neighborhood is very expensive. But I don't know of any stories where people were restricted. They were when I was growing up. I mean, I lived in all white neighborhoods in the city of Boston, but it isn't all white today.
You bring up The only reason why I make these references to history and Dr. King, because it's Black History Month. So you turn the channel and you'll see a speech of his, and you bring up a very interesting point. I can't remember which speech it was, or talk, or it was an interview, but we go to school, white and black, but then Dr. King said one of the most segregated places is on Sunday morning.
Right.
So you bring up a very good point, and I don't think we want to go back to that, to where we say that we want to be more inclusive, but understanding that we have value in our history also. That's all, because no, absolutely. We don't want churches being segregated. Absolutely not. And so to play that point, and then also you were saying something about, again, it goes back to home ownership, wealth, creating wealth. We have to solve some of these problems. We have to get to that point where we're dealing with those types of issues. Fairness, getting home ownership, wealth, creating wealth. Not making it so easy to get the other things in life, which is important also, but making it more equitable. We use the word equitable here, and achieving those types of things in life that we're talking about.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the need for young men to be able to get a driver's license.
Yes.
I'm wondering if in your programs that you're involved in are young Black, they're not just boys, but girls too, are they taught to get a credit card when they're, when they finish high school and start developing
So
the.
that's interesting. I graduated from high school so long ago. When I went to high school,
Our memories go back that far.
when I went to high school, you learned something called home economics and driver's ed. And I was telling the youngster, what did you learn in home economics? He didn't know what he looked at me like I had
we don't teach that
So
anymore.
all
Like a
that-
DVD or
all that stuff was taught in high school, how to balance a checkbook. The driver's ed was taught in high school. So what we have to do, or what we had to do in St. Michael's, I partnered with the school and went through getting funding through the community with help, is putting on driver's ed classes. That's simple, because I didn't know this, and this is how much of the park I've been and graduated years ago. Kids had to pay for their own driver's ed class.
Right.
Where when we came along, when I came
It's
along,
free.
it was free.
Mhm.
So that's a financial block right there, especially in the African-American community, especially. And how are you gonna get a job if you don't have a driver's license?
Right.
So it
Or a
starts,
car.
or a car.
Right.
Excellent,
Yeah.
or a car.
Or vote.
Or vote, and there you go. So
That's another
you gotta.
Or vote.
So
Yes,
vote, it's a very important issue. And I had that
Yes.
conversation with a young
Yes.
man. I told him, I says, look, you just graduated from high school, you're walking up down the street, show up at my police station tomorrow, and I'm gonna take you to get your driver's license. Well, he never showed up. But I had the conversation with him that this will help you to vote. So I'm saying those are the types of challenges that we have to do. It's that basic and fundamental grassroots stuff there, right there. This kid's graduating, not even getting a driver's license.
So what are we doing about that?
So we're coming up with programs, we're going to the community. We do a class each year with the partnership with and the school takes a lead in this. And St. Michael's, I'm talking about it. Kids from all over the county can come, and we go over to our classic car museum and we just teach them driver's ed. They don't have to pay for it. They, quote unquote, you fill out a grant application to get scholarship to pay, get to the classes. We're doing like 25, 30 kids a year.
Nancy, what are your thoughts on how big an issue is this in terms of not even just the driving part, but also the getting a foundation of credit so that you can go into a bank and say that, I can afford this, that type of a thing. Are we teaching kids about that?
I think there are some programs that do, and we have junior achievement in the community that takes volunteers into the classroom. But I think it's one of those areas that we really assume a lot of that's taught at home. And so it's information that you pass on in the family, if it's there or not. Not every family also, I was our director of our Habitat for Humanity affiliate here in Talbot and Dorchester County for about 10 years. And we focused a lot on financial education. And what I found was a lot of the families who became to purchase a home through us did not come up in a community where it's acceptable to talk to your children about financial issues. So often if you had a parent or parents who were struggling, it was a difficult thing to talk about. And maybe they hadn't been formally educated around it, so it was adult business, and that was a big part of our education program, really helping families understand how to engage their children in that conversation, set family goals. You know, so everybody who purchases a home through Habitat has to make a down payment, they have to have a savings account, so making that savings account a family goal. But those aren't necessarily conversations we can assume that every family is having.
Well, Deborah, it sounds like this kind of gets back to your issue of how this is, how the past few decades have affected the family. You know, we see families in the Black community where mom is working 2 jobs and dad's in jail and the kids are sleeping on grandpa's couch. You probably may even know who I'm talking about. But those are, what happens to those kids? Where's the safety net to help get that?
One of the reasons that we decided to build a gym, BAM, is build a gym for the kids to be able to come to, a safe place. Because as has been said, sometimes there's not a lot to do at Easton or St. Michael's or wherever.
Right.
I mean, we have the YMCA, but a lot of times our kids couldn't afford it or weren't always felt welcome in even going there. So now we have the BAM Athletic Center that our kids take advantage of and can come after school or whenever on the weekends to play basketball. We even have a group of Hispanic kids that have soccer on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. But the other thing that we're doing as far as parental education is that we're building an academic center. And
Right.
And in that academic center, not only will we have the Polaris Village Academy, which is a private school, so to speak, but it's open. I mean, it's not government funded. But that will be housed there. But we will also have our after-school kids come there. But we will also have classes from Chesapeake College that will help the parents to be able to come and take courses while the kids are out over to the gym, you know, playing in a safe place. They'll know where their kids are, but they can also take a course in bookkeeping or family finances, I would say, you know, trying to do better in their family structure.
How much impact does the community college have? Do they go back into the leaders, such like you folks, to find out what the needs are so they can make sure they get instructors who will be able to help?
I haven't had a lot of interaction with the community college actually coming to me and coming to Impact, but I do know they work with the community center on different issues.
Yeah.
So there is some partnership there. So to say nothing exists is not true, but there is some partnership. Could there be more? Yes, and that's part of what I need to do probably is reach out a lot more to get interaction, to try to get kids of all ethnic groups in colleges.
And one of the things that Chesapeake does do with BAM every year, and we're back to doing it, we didn't have it last year. Every year we have a community festival, BAM Fest, which will take place on May 14th this year. It used to be in Ottawa Park, but this year we're gonna be at the Moton Park off of Joe White Street, off of Port Street, so to speak, community pool, that park back there. And we have community programs or people in the community, organizations to set up tables, be vendors, and just share with the community, share with people who come what they have to, you know, they can take advantage of, what they have. Like Chesapeake College, the courses, what they can come and sign up for. So that's one thing that we do with Chesapeake.
A question. Oh, you. Please.
What about the young females? You're talking about males. What about the young females?
And we have just started this year, this is our first year, opening up BAM doors for the females to come in. I mean, for so long, we needed to focus on the males because we felt
Sorry.
She answers to everything.
So, no, but one of the things, and we're taking some of the restaurant owners, they're gonna come in and help school these kids, like what you're just saying about vocational, in the vocation of cooking. So, yeah, there are programs going on. And also mechanic schools. One of the things that we have a classic car museum in there, and one of the things they've done is taken in students and made them mechanics.
Is that at the high school level or at the college level?
So Talbot County Public Schools, while it's not called vocational anymore, whereas we used to have a separate VOTEC school in this county, there are certificate programs through the high school, and there is a mechanic program. And then, you know, additionally, like the Maritime Museum, it's a boat building program, so I think there's some complements between community organizations and the school system. Also, the Rotary Club of Easton has started a scholarship program to specifically fund vocational training for students, in addition to the many scholarship funds that Midshore has for traditional academic pursuits.
There was a question over here, or an observation maybe?
Can I go back to something Mary said earlier about the churches in St. Michael's? So I guess in the 90s, the churches in St. Michael's had a covenant relationship that was very active for a period of time. And actually Habitat for Humanity, Talbot County, was initially formed out of that covenant relationship. But it's my understanding that the white churches and the black church, and maybe New St. John too, I'm not sure, came together to worship together, to do some community work together. And as I said, Habitat was born out of that. And I think as time happened, sometimes programs like that sort of run their course. But there could be an opportunity to really facilitate this kind of conversation within the faith community. It really could be a powerful avenue for all
Well,
of
I
us.
know that, what's his name, Spanky, has the Covenant Choir. In fact, my husband is part of that, but because of COVID,
Oh,
it, you know, kind of has been
lovely though.
not active
Yeah.
at this point. But hopefully, once we're past COVID, it'll get back. And I think, you know, that was an integrated choir of those.
That's a great place to start, to just be doing,
Relationships.
that's exactly right, yes.
And the churches in St. Michael's are great. They're still doing a lot of that. And in fact, we just got a nice donation from the Christ Church yesterday. Presented us with, from the Christmas and St. Michael funds, with a donation for, because they know at the police department, we do a lot of work with kids. That's one of my most, as part of my business model. We try to do it prior to COVID messed up everything, but we're trying to get back to normal. We used to do what's called a junior police academy. When we take kids in and put them through the junior police academy and teach them what it is to be a police officer, but more importantly, what it is to be a good citizen. Because we give them lessons and what it is to be a commissioner and all this kind of stuff. So we take 9 to 12 years old and we just hang out with them and they love it. So we haven't been able to do that, but the churches have been very supportive of things like that. And it ends up probably 75, maybe 50% of my class is African-American. So we try to keep those types of things going, those types of programs.
I don't want to be.
But look, I like what you said about becoming good citizens. And I found that in my time, I used to work for a printing company. I was a photographer for 37 years. I retired in 2009 and I got really bored at home. And so I worked for the East Police part-time and becoming good citizens. And this is what I found about BAM. You can tell a child that come from that program. I've experienced it. You know, you're doing an excellent job with these boys. And you keep doing what you're doing. And it's one thing to know where somebody comes from and not understand. This is what good about this session right here. Find out where people come from and you'll understand where they're trying to go.
Thank you.
Lynn, may I be heard?
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to echo what the other speaker in your audience just said. If I could give Deborah Short a crown, I would. The program at BAM is amazing. It's amazing. I don't know how you do everything you do. And so many children and so many families as a result have been helped. From the time these kids get out of the schoolroom until their parents pick them up, they are given sustenance, not just for their bodies, not just for their minds, but for their souls.
Yeah.
And these children leave that program and they go home to their families and they teach their families, their adult family members, as well as the children, the lessons they have learned. I've seen it with my own eyes, time and time and time again. And if there's any program in our community that is helping children, it's BAM.
All right.
So thank you for what you're doing. Keep on doing it. And it's been an honor and a privilege to have worked with you in that program.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. So we have just 20 minutes left, and I wanted to turn this back to something that the two of you have actually commented on about, I think, I know that you did especially, and that is that I'd like to understand more about what we need to work on to better understand the need. Because it's pretty clear that it's not just you have to work on it, but we have to work on it. And how do we go about doing that? We've talked a lot about examples here, but let's talk about some more. Let's get it down to earth of.
So let me just say, you guys are taking the first step, okay? By having the courage to come out and do this, because again, it's Black History Month, and you can go through the channels and search the channels and hear about how we're going to get to the beginning of solving this problem. We have to start with conversation. Okay, we have to start with respectable conversation and then follow up with action. So by the mere fact that you guys are coming here to the table and trying to make an effort to understand, we've got to figure out a way to get that out and spread out more. And I'm sure, Nancy, we had a little conversation about this before we started. We'll expound about some things and why people can't get involved. But we just have to do a good job. And I've had, since George Floyd, we've had like 12 conversations on race in St. Michael's. And it's important that we have these things, because I'm speaking from a selfish side of it, from a police perspective. That's not how you do police work, okay? And I have to make sure that the African-American community knows that, because that's just not what we do. Okay, that was nothing short of a homicide did on TV. Okay, so we got to get to a point where we have folks trusting us. And 99.9% of the police departments in this country are like that, are like where you can be, that can be trusted. Okay, we just have to put our best foot forward. We always have to lead from the top. We always have to look down, have the courage to say when something's wrong is wrong. Okay. But I can guarantee you that in Colby County, I don't know of any police chief that would have countenanced what happened in Minnesota. Okay. With George Floyd. So we have a starting point there to work from. And we just have to step up to the plate and have the courage to do it. But having these conversations are very important, and then following up with action, because I thank you all for stepping up to play to share this. The most important thing, one of the things, and Connie talked about it, and it came up in the previous conversations, and in our previous conversations and conversation of race, one of the things that's a hot topic, and I mentioned a little bit, is critical race theory. Okay, everybody tenses up when they hear that term. Okay, it's nothing no more than studying our history. So we're in the process now of trying to figure out different language. Okay, Connie had an excellent session, the language of racism. Okay, for example, you had a question on here that was going to be asked to answer. What would you say are the highest priorities in anti-racist work in this country? Let's change anti-racist to pro-diversity. Means the same thing. If you're pro-diversity, you got to be anti-racist. Right. So what that will do is help bring people to the table. So we're struggling with that now in some of our conversations on race. We want to have the substance there, but we're trying to figure the language that we can use to get more people to the table.
Oh, such an interesting point. So, yeah. I'd call with comments.
And another very bad use of language was defund the police,
Yeah.
which was, just totally abused and misused in the way it was reacted to.
So I have that struggle with my guys all the time. Oh, they want to defund the police. I said, no.
No.
What did you expect to happen after witnessing what we witnessed on TV? It would have been a travesty if nobody said anything. So all we have to do is have the courage to step up to the plate and do a better job.
Right.
And trust me, it's being done. It's being done all across the country. You hear about the bad things and we see them because now we got the video and we should have body cameras and we should, hopefully.
Oh, he's recording us.
No, I wouldn't, but no. And we should, because we have to be held accountable as police, because it's the core of what we're talking about.
Well, why is it taking so long? I mean, I
Why?
heard years ago,
Mhm.
Corey, what's his name?
Mhm.
Or that.
No, the senator.
Cory Booker.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Cory Booker was in Newark, mayor, right?
Mhm.
And he was able to clean up everything because of community policing.
Mhm.
So why hasn't that gone to more police departments in our country? That kind of perceptive or model, yeah.
Sure, and it's a challenge. I mean, I'm speaking from my perspective and my business model. I mean, you got to have your political leaders support you to start with, and they support me, my county commissioners, my town commissioners. And you're absolutely right. We have to get, and don't take this in the wrong way. I'm not saying I got all this courage and all this leadership and all this kind of stuff, but you have to have the right people in place to make sure it happens. I mean, it's nothing short of that. You got to have people in place to hold people accountable. You got to have people in place that lead by example. You got to have people in place that get up, 30,000 feet? What's the word? 30, is it 50,000?
Yeah,
50,000 feet down and look down and see what direction the organization needs to go. And you got to have people that just aren't afraid. So, I mean, the bottom line is it's being done. It's just that we hear about the horrible incidences, and we should. We should hear about the horrible incidences, but it's right now, starting effective July 1st, 2022, there's something called the Police Accountability Act that's going to change the way we do business in police work forever. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Is that in Maryland or?
Yes,
National?
it got passed in Maryland, got passed at the last legislative session. And we need another 3-hour session if we want to.
Yeah.
So I won't belabor what's in there,
Yeah.
but you can go online and Google House Bill 670 and it'll tell you all the things and all the stuff that we have to do as police leaders. No longer will a lot of the stuff happen. We never had a horrible problem in Maryland. I can't for the life of me think of why that incident happened, where it happened, but that kicked off a lot of conversations and our conversations on race, which it should have. And it made us be held accountable, which we always should have been.
As lay people, I think one of the things the schools did was to hold something called courageous conversation, where people, they brought, teachers in and whatever, and they had to deal with their own personal racism, so to speak, that maybe you're not aware of, because sometimes we're not. If you live in a society where everything has been kind of generated towards you, maybe you have some biases or some prejudices that you're not even aware of, which is okay. But to recognize it and to be able to deal with that first, I think that's one of the things that we can do as a society. But also to speak up, have a voice, because racism does affect us all negatively. It doesn't just deal with one or two groups, and that's their problem. No, it's a community problem. It's a national problem, so to speak. So I think just having a voice, continuing these great conversations like we're doing, as Chief said, but there's some action that goes with it. We always we can always do more.
So let's talk a little bit more about how we move from talking about it to doing something about it? How can, we have a whole host of, the senior community here in Talbot County is supposed to be around 40% by the end of this decade. And these are all people who have lots of experience. How can we get them more involved in helping the situation?
Go ahead.
Well, I know we are looking for volunteers all the time. You can always come in and read with a first grader or come in and teach. Our boys struggle with math, sometimes even in middle school, right, Todd? These are middle school. And that, you have some knowledge of that. Maybe some teachers are in the group, tutoring, volunteer tutoring, whatever. I extend my hand to any of you that would like to come and help us.
And you'll come back richer for it. You'll be the one that will gain the most.
So true, Karen.
I'd add that one, just talking is important. So that is an action. And I hear that a lot from people. Well, I've been to those conversations. I'm more about action. Come to the conversation, build the relationship. Because for someone like me, I can choose to step in and out of this, and not everyone else has that privilege. So showing up for a conversation is important. On a practical level, Talbot Family Network does have facilitated monthly conversations on race. The fourth Thursday of the month, we were doing them hybrid. Hopefully we're going back to in-person, but we'll see where the COVID numbers go. Those are open to any interested community members, and our facilitators are people of color. I do just want to amplify on that note, though, what Mary said earlier, and really want to thank, we've been rotating around. The next one's at the school board office. I really want to thank Deborah and Chief for being on this panel, because we do sometimes, as white community members, exhaust our leaders and friends and neighbors of color by suddenly being aware or concerned about an issue and going to someone and asking them to explain it to us. So I think, just speaking from my experience as a white person, I think it's very important for me to do my work, which means reading, listening to podcasts, watching certain movies, documentaries. Maggie gave a lot of bibliography kind of references in her talk. The library has had some references on their website. I'm happy to share things. There is a ton of rich literature and media out there for us to learn from. We are also partnering with the Talbot County Free Library to host a Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Book Club. We just started in January. We're piloting this, going very well so far. We meet on the second Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. We have the meeting virtually, and based on feedback may continue that way, but that's another space to show up and do the work. I would also ask each of you to think about the spaces that you can help bring this topic to. Many of our retired community members serve on a nonprofit board. They're a member of a faith community. They volunteer somewhere. Are you willing to be the person who says, hey, I don't hear equity in the conversation. Hey, let's look at our numbers. Who are we really serving? What does the data really tell us about our community? Oh, is our board all made up of white people, and the clients we serve are all people of color? Are we sharing power with that community? Is our program something we do to people or do with them or for them? I talk to a lot of nonprofit leaders who leave the workshops that Talbot Family Network has hosted. They're excited, they're energized. Sometimes they go back to their organization and meet, maybe not opposition so much as just apathy or reluctance.
How do we do it, kind of a thing.
That's a very good point, yes. To that end, this year, Talbot Family Network, our board agreed to start making equity grants to our nonprofit partners in the community. So you leave a training, a staff person's really excited, they're not sure what to do. Instead of us holding these trainings and having an agency maybe send 1 or 2 people, we're now going to fund for that nonprofit to bring the training to everyone. The board, the staff, their clients, the stakeholders. They can do an equity audit. They can bring in an outside consultant to really look at the way they do business. But having the support of donors, people who contribute to organizations and are willing to support this work, all of that is very important.
Thank the Lord for the man who gave money to BAM, because we don't get funding from the government, but a millionaire he took the first step to give money to BAM to help us to be where we are today. And if it hadn't been for him, we may have
been there, but not to the extent that we are today. So we need each other.
I just want to say a couple of things. One, I was brought up on the Lower East Side of New York, okay? And my mother and father never taught us prejudice. I was never prejudiced. In my community, we had every nationality, every religion that you could think of. So I know a little Yiddish, I know a little Polish, but that's besides the point. My daughter, my youngest daughter, teaches in a sort of a high school. It's called BOCES. It's a trade school where kids that don't want to go to college and need an education are trained in auto mechanics, hairdressing, agriculture, welding, all kinds of cooking. I mean, all different shops. And there's over 300 or 400 kids in her class, in her school. That's what we need over here. That's what we need over here. In the worst way, we need one over here on the Eastern Shore. I get people like Dave Shaw tell me, I can't get men.
Right.
Chris Keplinger, electrician, I can't get men. Come on. We have the community. We have the young kids. We need some place to train them.
Right.
That's it. Come on.
A very good point. Another?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, BOCES just doesn't only do that because my wife was a BOCES special ed teacher, okay? They do a whole lot. Board of Cooperative Education Services, it's part of the New York system. But they do a whole lot of things besides, and you're right, doing that, but they also do a lot of other things too. For me, you know, I know, like, you're exhausted by the conversation. I'm exhausted by the conversation. I mean, I have to be honest, I am. I come to them all the time because I want to learn and see what's going on. I'm exhausted by seeing the snail's pace and anything happens to get done. Okay, that's the exhaustion, you know, the exhaustion out of it. I think just for me, a lot of it comes back to, in many ways, people having personal responsibility. You don't dump everything on a teacher, you know, out of the family and decide, well, the teacher's going to take care of that, because the teachers have enough to do, like teach, and they don't need to do everything else that's going on. You don't dump everything on the police and say, well, I can't deal with that, so now the police have to do this. The police have to deal with all of this stuff, which I think you do a great job with. But way too much, the expectations of what you are supposed to do, whether what as opposed to what you are doing, is way out of line. You know, I just personally, I just feel I know a lot of cops. You know, I grew up with that, and I just see like how they went through and what their responsibilities have increased. Like I said, my wife was a teacher. I watched how suddenly she was not just a teacher, she was a social worker. She was not just a teacher and the social worker. She also had to teach the parents how to parent. You know, it's like, it just seems like people, in lots of ways, people just like give it up and say, here, you show me how to do. There's really a need for people to take personal responsibility for what they have to do, raise your kids, raise them, and be invested in doing that.
When I was in training in 1982, I'll never forget this statement. He was a state police officer, Rick Nash. I'll never forget what he told me. I was 6 months on the job, and he says, well, you went to the police academy to learn how to be a police officer, and now I'm going to teach you how to be a cop.
Right.
So he said, the first thing you're going to learn is, guess what? You're a glorified social worker carrying a gun. That's what you're talking about. He said, because you're going to be confronted in your career as a state police officer with situations where you're going to have to solve problems. And the answer is not going to be arrest, because you're just one person dealing with the whole community out here. So just know that going forward, and don't get discouraged by it. Do what you can, do the best you can. And that was one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever had in my career, because he brought me down to that level that knowing that that's what this job was all about, to solve the problem. And people are gonna come to you because the reason why we're 24 hours, we're the easy, out of anybody that's easily accessible, who's accessible? The police. They want you to solve their problem. They don't want you calling the paramedics. They don't want you calling somebody else. They want you to solve the problem. So you make a very good point, but that's something that's just ingrained in us. If you're a good police officer.
It's ingrained if you're a good police officer,
Yes.
but it shouldn't, but some of those things
Yes, I could.
should not be your response. For example, mental health. Okay, there should be people who are helping you with mental health. You shouldn't be the psychiatrist.
Well, that was the
No.
true reason, that's the true
Right.
definition of defund the police,
Right.
which was taken out of context, so, right?
Yeah. So the words were horrendous,
Yeah.
okay? Which then got twisted, but one of the concepts of it was police should police.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what you're trained to do.
So we're running out of time,
Oh,
and I want to give you, the three of you, a chance to put this in the final perspective that you want to leave us in. Nancy, come on.
Well, Chief alluded to this question that you've given us that might be one of the questions we talked about. What would be the highest priority in anti-racist work in our country? And I mean, just quite simply, I think we have to make it a priority. I don't think we have. In certain communities, organizations, I mean, you can find spaces where it's a priority, but it isn't a priority. And unfortunately, it's become very politicized and very divisive at this point. So really what we can all do in our small spaces, our networks of influence, our spheres of influence, at a very local level to start to make this a priority is important.
yes.
Deborah, you didn't comment?
Pretty much, I agree with what Nancy has already said. Just know that society is getting a negative impact of African Americans because of social media outlets, because of white supremacy groups, because of the acceptance of some of the political views that are aligned against us. And that BAM is trying to address those things through building within, so that when our kids get to a certain point, they will again be able to stand on their own.
And for those of you who are listening to this, BAM needs volunteers.
Definitely.
Okay, Chief.
So real quick, you brought up an excellent point, moving at a snail's pace. Again, it's Black History Month, you see it all the time, you see quotes from Dr. King on TV. What was the quote he said about the arc of justice bends slowly, but it bends towards justice. I know I'm saying it wrong, but the moral of the whole point of his comment is that we're heading in the right direction. Okay, and that's what we have to continue to do. It's moving slowly at a snail's pace, as you said, but we have to bend that towards justice. And we're heading. We just have to stay steadfast in what we're doing and become involved in things like this, especially because in positions like what I'm in as a chief of police, because it's very important, because it's grassroots. I mean, the first thing you see on TV is what the police did to somebody. So we have to be very conscientious of it and make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in a fair and equitable way.
Now, is there somebody on the Zoom who can see the chat? Because it looks like we've had some people commenting in the chat and we just simply cannot see it. So as we
I think you've covered everything, pretty much everything in the chat.
Oh, good, thank you.
I'm looking at it.
Good.
And Chief, the quotation is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice."
Thank you.
That's good.
That's a beautiful quotation.
I know I botched it up, but thank you for
No,
that.
you had it in your head. I looked it up, so.
She Googled it. So thank you so much, everyone, for a vibrant discussion, to our panelists for helping us guide this path. And I hope that we will see more of these discussions.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
Thank you.